Okay, this is part 2 of the video. I'm going to go back into ProCamera, and so if you haven't watched part 1 of the video, make sure and watch that first because I'm just picking up where I left off. Again, just shooting these as a little bit shorter segments, so it's easier for me to upload these from home. All right, so ordinarily I wouldn't shoot in vertical format either, but the way this app works, if I turn it on its side, it simply it'll go sideways, but all the words still read sort of sideways then, so it's much harder for me to do this demo. So anyway, so back to the demo. So more options here. So the main reason you need to download an app to work your phone is if your normal app for your phone does not cover manual modes. The way to be a more professional photographer and to get better photos is to be able to take manual control over your camera, right? That's why you would shoot with a digital SLR or one of the larger size cameras, is because they offer that kind of control so that you can tell the camera where to focus and you can tell the camera how light or dark to make the image without having to do this. And as I showed you, the iPhone's a regular app that comes with the phone works pretty well, but this one actually gives you a lot of control. So I can go into full manual mode, auto mode, or semi-automatic mode. So I'll start out by showing you the features of semi-automatic. Main thing is you just want to get out of shooting in automatic mode so that you are being more creative. Because one of the things that using an app like this does is it lets you slow down a little bit and focus on making a good photograph. And it gives you more to think about creatively than just pushing the button after pointing the camera at something relatively interesting, right? So, all right, so in semi-automatic mode, what happens is just as in the app that comes with iPhone, you have this little thing that you can move around and you can put it on different parts of the image in much the same way. What you have is you have exposure and focus are combined into that square and circle. And so exposure is just how much light you're letting into the camera. You're either letting it be bright or dark. Right now the image looks pretty dark. And focus, of course, is just where the image focuses. And so right now I'm focused on Totoro in the foreground. Now if I tap on the center of the screen, it separates those two out so that I can use them separately. And that's a really cool feature of the semi-automatic mode. It doesn't work so much in manual mode, but it works in the semi-automatic. And so you can see it says focus on the blue square. And so this blue square right here is actually where I'm focusing. So here we are focused right up close on Totoro. And then back here, you'll see the focus shifted to Rafiki. And so that gives you a lot of power over it. So if you've ever tried to take a photo and it's just not focusing where you want it to, like let's say you're shooting through a screen window or a fence and it wants to focus on the screen window instead of the tree that you're trying to shoot outside the screen window, this will let you choose where to focus a little bit better. So the little yellow circle is exposure, and so if I put that in different parts of the image, it chooses an exposure based on what it's reading, what the light meter in the camera is reading. And so if I put it just right on the super white belly of Totoro. If you haven't seen the movie Totoro, it's awesome. It's super funny. It's a great movie. It's one of my favorites. So if you don't know who this character is, look it up. Totoro is a great movie. So anyway, so this is not changing focus. You'll notice my focus is staying locked back there on Rafiki, and as I move the circle around, it doesn't matter where I move it, the focus isn't changing because this is just changing exposure. So if I put it on his belly, it basically darkens everything and sets the exposure based on that really white area. If I put it in a really dark area, like say back here in the background where that desk is, where it's really black, it's trying to lighten that area up some. So I'm going to switch my little props out really quickly just to make more of a point of this. So if I take a white cup and a black cup, a little tiny espresso cup here, that'll really help you understand some things. So if I take this as focus, let's just set focus right there on the black cup. Now if I move this exposure to the black cup, it's really brightened it up a lot. And so it actually looks kind of gray. And the reason for that is your camera doesn't really know what you're pointing at. Like, even though camera phones are really smart, the computer in the camera does not know what you're pointing at. It does not know I'm pointing at a black cup. It has no clue. All it has is it's got a light sensor that can read. Now, of course, these two things do have face detection, and they do have pretty amazing sort of artificial intelligence in them. So I'm not sure what it really knows. Maybe it does know there's a cup in there. But anyway, but what it's looking for is in the area you've set the light meter to read, it wants that to be kind of a medium gray. It sort of works off the assumption that that an average photo is going to be kind of gray when you combine all the elements. So if you took this photo here and swirled all the elements, the black cup, the white cup, the sort of brown bamboo thingy that this is all sitting on, and just swirled them all together, you'd end up with a kind of an average gray. And so that's what the meter's going for. Now if I switch this over to the white, you'll notice everything went dark to try to make the cup go kind of gray, right? And so now the foreground cup is too black, the background cup is a little too dark. So to set a correct exposure, you might choose like an in-between area. So like this bamboo section right here, that's actually a pretty medium average gray, so I could set the exposure there. And then I've got, the cup is still coming out, this area here is just coming out way too white. So you'd want to mess around with that a little bit more. But that's basically how those two things lock together. Gives you a lot of control. So if I go back to modes again, I can switch to pure manual. Boom, let's get out of there. Okay, so click the grid again to get out of that. And so now I'm in a different option. And so instead of using those controls, you can still use them. But as soon as you click on one of these buttons, you'll notice your yellow circle that does exposure, it has a lock on it now. And so it's not going to change the exposure for you in the same way once you start messing with these things, because now you can see I'm hitting the time here, 125, 60, 30, 15, 8, and so forth. And so I'm basically just taking manual control over that completely. And so these numbers down here in the lower left where it says time, in the lower left it's now set on 3, and you notice in the top left it says 1/3 of a second up there. And so that's what these means. It's not 3 seconds, it's 1/3 of a second. And that's actually the slowest that the iPhone shutter will go. So if you've got a different phone, you can get much slower shutter speeds, possibly. I don't know because I don't have one. If you've got a digital SLR camera, you can have exposure times that last 24 hours if you want to. I mean, you can set bulb setting, you can set a timer, but the longest shutter speed on an SLR is usually 30 seconds, and then you have to go into bulb mode, which is a way of controlling it for even longer. So all these are, just put a 1 over it. So 1/125th of a second, 2/50ths of a second, and so forth. And so that's your shutter speed. And let me put my cuter props back up. Yeah, these are a little more interesting to look at. All right, so I can still use this for focus. Let's get my focus back up here on, just move this out of the way, set that on Tutoro, and get back into setting this manually. And so basically what these means, the reason you'd want to take control over your shutter speeds is if you wanted to do slow photography where you've got some light trails or light movement. 1/3 of a second won't give you much, but it can give you camera shake and blur if you want that. Generally speaking, you don't want to set this lower than 1/30th of a second because you end up with camera shake. And to be safe, maybe 1/60th of a second's even safer. If you were shooting sports and you wanted things to freeze time, you might go up to 250, 500. How high does this go? This goes to 12,000th of a, I can't even say that word, of a second. So that's super fast. And so that would really probably freeze the blade of a helicopter if you were taking a picture. Now you notice everything went black. That's because 12,000ths of a second is really fast. And so that means the shutter is staying open for a tiny little amount of time and not enough time to let much light in. So this brings us to the second part of the exposure that you control, which is ISO. ISO just stands for International Standards Organization. It's kind of a boring term for how cameras read a sensitivity to light. So this one goes down to 25. On an SLR, they usually stop at 100. I'll get into that later. It's getting really kind of technical right now, but I'm going to keep moving my ISO over. You see this thing that I'm sliding over in the lower right corner. And now that I'm ISO 2000, you can start to see the image come up, but it's still not letting in enough light. Maybe if I move the actual spotlight closer, you can see it coming in. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the time, the shutter speed. And so as I get down to say 2,000th of a second, you start to see the image. So that's basically how you work this. You control these two. Now the ISO settings, that's set to 2000, actually they're both set to 2000 right now. Let me change things around a little bit. Now I can move my ISO down to like 400, 500, something like that. Looks like I'm getting down to 250. So anyway, all right, so the ISO settings, you really don't want to use something like 2000 because you get really grainy images. The higher that number, the more the, in order to let more light in, your sensor basically changes the way it responds to light and it makes bigger pixels. I'm probably botching that explanation up, but basically all you need to know is it takes pretty crappy pictures at 2000 ISO. So you don't really want to set that much more than 800 or 1000. And so you can move these things around to get the darkness and lightness levels that you choose. And so this is really a very professional way to work. It's how I often work with my digital SLR. So you can move that around until you get an exposure that you like. Another trick if you're in semi-automatic mode is you can use what's called exposure compensation. Let's say you've got your exposure close, but you're not sure. If you click in the top middle where it says +00 EV, that's your exposure compensation button. And down at the bottom, you can see this little thing that I'm scrolling back and forth on. That basically adds or takes light away. So -2, that's darkening the image, -3, -4, all the way down to -7. Or we can start kicking that up to +1 and 2. And this is exposure compensation is something I use all the time on my digital SLR. It's a way of just taking quick control over the camera if you don't feel like going into shutter speed and ISO and so forth. But the main thing to remember about working in these modes, let me go back to manual, is to keep an eye on understanding what shutter speed does and understanding what ISO does. So shutter speed, basically, try not to shoot less than 1/30th of a second or 60th of a second, because you start to get some camera shake if you're going handheld. If you're working on a tripod though, you notice if I go down to 1/3 of a second, up top in the top left where it says 1/3 of a second, it shows a camera on a tripod. That's warning you that you're going to get some camera shake if you take a photo. So your shutter speed is really just about controlling how fast the things are moving that you're shooting and if you want them in focus or not. So we'll do a selective blur exercise on a future assignment where you intentionally shoot with too slow of a shutter speed to introduce blur. And then your ISO setting, you just want to set that as low as you can get away with while getting the right shutter speed. But basically the lower these ISOs, the more high quality the image is. And the higher that ISO number is, the lower the quality gets. It becomes really grainy and kind of crappy. So, all right, so I think that's about all I want to talk to you about on this is just, so your assignment is to shoot shadows. So I'll send you some more information. I'm going to do another slideshow on the shadow assignment to give you a little bit more ideas on that. But hopefully that's helpful for using your phone as a camera. Some other tips are clean your lens because you're using your phone and it's in and out of your pocket all the time. There might be a little bit of oil from your hand on the lens and that can actually cause it to not focus as well. So I'd keep a little like eyeglass cleaning cloth or some little nice microfiber cloth to occasionally clean your lens off to make sure you're getting good images. You also have a flash on there. I generally recommend just turn that thing off. You can see in the upper left corner, I can turn the flash on or off. Looks like I'm totally messing it up right now. Get back into auto. Yeah, so you can turn the flash on or off. I just generally leave it off because it just makes weird looking images. You can set up spotlights or use natural light from the window. Things like that really work better than flash. Flash is such a frontal light, it kind of blasts things and doesn't look so good. And also don't use your digital zoom. If you try to zoom in, you're basically just zooming in on the sensor itself. So you can actually do that later. You can take the photo from as close as you can get and then later crop that in Photoshop. So you don't want to throw away information that you might need later. So don't really use zoom. If you got an SLR, of course, you can zoom in and out because that's a real optical zoom rather than just cropping on the sensor. I'm going to go and pull the camera out of the tripod that I've got it set up on just to show you this little apparatus I have. I had to use tape because my phone didn't quite fit in it. All right, so this little bit here on the tripod comes off, and so this was sold separately, and then this just clips right onto your phone, and then you can attach this to any kind of tripod. So this is a little tiny tabletop tripod, or you can attach it to a much bigger tripod. So another thing I want to talk about is, earlier I was talking about ISO, and just so you can be sure and understand this. So these are a couple of photos. This one was taken with a really low number on the ISO, like around 25, I think. And if I zoom into this, you can see it's a pretty clean, smooth photo. You'll notice in the blacks and in the dark grays that it's pretty smooth and clean. If I go to the one taken at a high ISO, this is taken at 2000 ISO. And that's one of the two controls that you're controlling in manual. We're controlling the exposure through the shutter time. So you're controlling shutter speed and you're controlling ISO. So you can see how that's much grainier and there's all this kind of purple and green flecks in it. So that would be a pretty poor ISO setting to use. So that's just a visual on that. And let me get out of here. Anyway, so thanks for listening. I'm going to go upload these videos, and I'll be sending some more stuff your way too, so keep an eye on your email inbox.